The principle of punishment is a categorical imperative, and woe to him who crawls through the windings of eudaimonism in order to discover something that releases the criminal from punishment, or even reduces its amount by the advantage it promises, in accordance with the Pharisaical saying, "It is better for one man to die than for an entire people to perish." For if justice goes, there is no longer any value in man's living on the earth. Immanuel Kant. I've started to get into what Kant calls states' right. So, the law, the justice as it should be in the state. And in my previous lecture, I discussed first what is the point of the state? What is the state there for? And I explained that for Kant, all right is about the mine and yours, so about property. There's innate rights, there's that which is mine by birth, like my body, my freedom, and there's acquired rights, so there's that which became mine at some point, like my house. But the point of all right is that what is mine should be mine and what is yours should be yours, and I should stay away from what is yours and you should stay away from what is mine. And in the state of nature, when there is no state, no laws, this is of course not guaranteed. There can always be conflicts. There is always insecurity of rights. There can be provisional property, something I claimed as mine, but no one necessarily accepts that it's mine and leaves it to me, which is why we need public right, whose principle is the old suum quique tribur, give to each his own, that is, give each a guarantee of his rights. And that is what the state is for. The state should guarantee people's rights. The state is there so that there is a distributive justice, so that justice is distributed out. Everyone gets his and gets security in what is his and gets protected in that, and thereby the state is to end this state of nature, this war of all against all, and create perpetual peace. So far so good, but what if someone oversteps? What if even with the state setting into law who has which right and what belongs to whom, what if someone breaks the law? Clearly there need to be punishments, which is why criminal right, or criminal law as you might say, is an important part of the philosophy of state right. The philosopher needs to talk about how exactly crimes should be punished and to what end, what is even the point of punishing, because that should maybe be discussed first, because depending on what you think is the point of punishment, you might arrive at different punishments. And Kant does talk about this, but I must stress that what he has to say is wrong. And it is so wrong that it is pretty much worthless philosophically. Now, I already said in my lecture on what is the right to Kant and what is the difference between right and ethics, that Kant's philosophy of right, along with his theology, is amongst the weaker parts of his philosophical thinking. And in the philosophy of right, that is true for some things I already discussed, for Kant's teaching of the state of nature, of the private right, and for Kant's teachings of the original acquisition, the rightful origin of property. But nowhere is this more clear and more obvious than when it comes to criminal right. Here, Kant is not so much speaking as a philosopher. The philosopher is always an untimely person, is always free of any prejudices, any ideologies of his time. But rather here Kant is speaking very much as a man of his time. And this is a reason why if you don't want to listen to all these lectures I'm giving here on Kant, and I would understand that. I don't expect. I've already given more than 70 lectures, and I might be about half done with what I have to say about Kant. And these lectures tend to be like 2 hours long or longer. So I don't expect that everyone will listen to all these lectures, and that's not necessarily the point of them. I try to keep them in a way that each lecture can sort of stand for itself, that you don't have to have listened to all previous lectures to be able to understand them. So it's perfectly fine if you don't want to be as thorough, if you don't want to get into Kant as deeply as me, to just check out specific lectures on specific topics that interest you. But exactly for that reason, even though it might be a bit strange to give a recommendation against yourself, against your own video, precisely for that reason, I'm saying if you are not really interested in getting all of Kant's philosophy, if you are skipping some lectures, then this should definitely be one of the ones you skip, because that's one of the more unimportant ones. Better to use your time for the lecture on what is wisdom to Kant, or what is the conflict of the faculties, or the 3 lectures on Kant's methods of thinking, or the lecture on transcendental idealism, the lectures on the table of categories, the lectures on the beautiful and the sublime and the genius artist, the lectures on the categorical imperative, the lecture on lying, the lecture on conscientiousness. Those are my truly important lectures, or some of them. Important both for understanding Kant, but also to truly learn from Kant, because that's what I want to offer here, right? It's not just you should go away having some knowledge saved in your head about Kant. I mean, nobody needs that knowledge. Rather, what I want is Aufklärung. So people, if they deal with Kant or with any philosopher, they should truly learn something from it for their lives. They should truly become more aufklärt, that is, more critical, more rational, more moral, more felicitous people. And you probably won't become that from Kant's criminal right. So you might skip this one if you skip any of my lectures, because if there's one part of Kant's philosophy where you really cannot learn anything for your Aufklärung, it's this. Still, for those who stick around, I do want to talk about this topic. First off, because I want to be thorough. I want to talk about all aspects of Kant's thinking, not just those I agree with. And I also don't want to gloss over. I mean, Kant wasn't perfect. Kant too was human. I don't want to gloss over Kant having made mistakes. But also, I want to use this opportunity to show how you should criticize a philosopher and disagree with him, and how you shouldn't. So while from this topic you cannot really learn something from Kant himself for your own Aufklärung, still this lecture, like my other lectures, is supposed to give some sort of Aufklärung, and namely here you can hopefully learn how to think, how to properly criticize. But before we get to that, let's first talk about Kant's philosophy of criminal right, if you even want to call it a philosophy, because really I cannot stress enough how bad it is. So it's disappointing if you read and appreciate other parts of Kant's thinking, but really there's stuff like Kant saying that human beings have both rights and duties, and then he says God has only rights and no duties. There's nothing we can demand from God. He can only demand from us. And then he says the criminal, the convicted criminal, on the other hand, has only duties but no rights. Like he might be convicted to forced labor and then he has a duty to work, but he has no rights. And this is not just something we can criticize from the outside, saying even the criminal should have rights, but we can even criticize it from within Kant's own philosophy, because Kant himself, at other points, not just once, but many times, states that rights and duties go together. That you cannot just have one without the other. That a law, that's what Kant likes to say, a law cannot oblige me, that is, it cannot give me duties that I have to fulfill, if it cannot protect me. That is, if it cannot guarantee me rights that I have. So this is a clear inconsistency, this is a clear contradiction within Kant's own thinking. Here he is going so obviously against his own principle that I don't know how he himself could not have seen that. I mean, the only possible way to excuse that is to say that this statement, the criminal has duties without rights, comes in a very late work of Kant's, and maybe you can excuse him with already being very old and getting senile, because otherwise, I'm sorry, this is just obvious that this contradicts his own philosophy. But let's get more into this. What is Kant saying about the criminal right? Well, Kant, first of all, he is a supporter of the so-called jus talionis. In practice, what this means is, first, Kant is against fines and such stuff. He is against forcing someone to pay money as a punishment, because he says this would effectively mean that as the victim of someone's crime, I am letting myself be paid in order to be victimized. And this would be dishonoring. So the point is that to Kant, I already gave a lecture on the duties towards oneself. To him, morality is not just about how we treat others, but rather we also have a duty to have reverence for the dignity of humanity and ourselves. This is even central to his morality. He would say, if you don't revere humanity in your own person, and if you don't take care of your own dignity, then you will not revere it in others and will not have reverence for their dignity. And so you cannot just throw away your own dignity. But this is what people do when they let themselves be harmed for money, right? I mean, there is such people, especially nowadays in the days of the internet, people who do it for clicks or whatever. Like, there's people who say to someone else, if you pay me some money, then you can kick me in the balls. And this, Kant would say, is immoral. Sure, I'm not hurting anyone else, but I'm throwing my dignity away for money. Well, but if someone kicked me in the balls without me offering it, but then afterward all he had to do was pay me money, and then I would accept that and say, okay, now it was fine. Then according to Kant, that would essentially come down to the same thing. I would still receive money in order for letting myself be harmed, letting my dignity be harmed. And this cannot be, Kant says. So rather, again, Kant says we must do in quantity and in quality to the criminal what he has done to others. In practice, this means for him that, for example, the murderer should be murdered. So Kant is for the death penalty here. Rapists, including child rapists, according to Kant, should be castrated. And as for thieves, here Kant says that they should be put to forced labor and lose their property. So essentially, they should become slaves. And the point of all this to Kant is simply to enact justice, because according to him, it is just to do to the criminal what he has done to others. And that is the essential purpose of punishing. So you punish for the sake of punishing. You punish because the punishment is deserved. Kant also discusses what he calls pragmatic punishments. That would be a punishment that is not done for its own sake, but rather for some purpose outside the punishment, like for the prevention of further crimes. Doesn't matter if you want the criminal that you punish himself to learn a lesson through suffering the punishment, or whether you want to, through punishing this criminal, discourage others from doing the same crime because they see him be punished for it. It doesn't matter. In both cases, it would be a pragmatic punishment, because you are not punishing the person simply because he deserves and it is just that he is punished, but rather you are punishing him because you hope that through punishing him you will achieve some other goal, namely you will prevent further crimes, be it his crimes or crimes that others might have committed. And Kant says that he is not completely against pragmatic punishments. He says that if you are already punishing someone, you might as well, so to say, make good use of that and use that just punishment also for pragmatic purposes. This is why Kant, for example, says the death penalty does not have to happen secretly, away from the public eye, as is done nowadays, but rather there can be public executions, so as to discourage others from murdering because they see the murderer being put to death. Justice as such, Kant would say, only asks that the murderer be executed, not necessarily that he be executed in public. But since we are already executing him for reasons of justice, we might as well do it in public for pragmatic reasons. Indeed, Kant says that the state even has a duty to also make pragmatic use of the punishments. Kant says this is one of the wider duties. I already discussed this difference in an earlier lecture on the types of duties, on the morality of reverence and love. Kant says there's 4 types of duties, because we can have duties towards others, we can have moral duties towards ourselves, but then there's also more narrow duties that are about reverence for someone's rights, about not violating rights. But then there are also wider duties that are about furthering the purpose of someone. And Kant would say, well, if the murderer is executed away from the public eye, then no one's rights are violated. But if he is executed in public, that might lead to less murders. And so therefore the purpose of the other people, the purpose to not be murdered, the purpose to live in a state where as few as possible murders happen, that purpose might be furthered. So Kant would say there's even a wider duty to execute in public. And this is one of the inconsistencies here, because the wider duties are parts of ethics, not of right. Right? I gave a lecture where I discussed what is the difference between ethics and right to Kant. And to Kant, ethics is a matter of our inner goodwill. Do I have the goodwill to do what is right, to do what the moral law demands of me, simply because the moral law demands it, or don't I have that goodwill? The right, however, is not concerned with that. The right is concerned only with, not with the inner goodwill, but with outer actions that can be enforced. The goodwill, after all, cannot be enforced, only actions can be enforced. And the right is only about forcing people as much as is necessary in order to protect everyone's freedom, right? So the right, for example, should forbid murdering or raping or stealing, because all those acts would violate other people's freedom. But the right is not concerned with the wider duties. The right is only concerned with the narrow duties towards others. So Kant would say it's not the job of the right, and therefore of the state, to enforce goodness in every way. It is just their job to make sure that people are free, which of course also means that they are free to be and to do good out of their own choice, right? So that's why Kant would say, if there's a beggar by the street, sure, the money that people gave to him, that is in his cup, that is now his. So if someone passes him and takes the cup from him, steals that money, here this is something that the right should prevent, because this is theft. This is a violation of his property rights. But on the other hand, if someone passes him by, not stealing his money, but not giving him more money, not giving charity, maybe you can say that person is an evil person for not giving charity, for not caring about the poor, but still the beggar would not have the right to just force that person to give him money. That would be stealing, right? If he took the money by force. The beggar can maybe say, oh, you have no heart. Oh, you would also, if you were so poor, you would also want someone to donate money to you. That he can do. But he cannot take the money by force, because the right is not there to enforce what would be good. The right is just there to make sure everyone is free. Now the person passing the beggar can use that freedom to be a good person and to give the beggar money. but he cannot be forced. That would violate his freedom. So, with that in mind, I don't see how Kant can suddenly say the state should not just protect freedom, but rather should also have a wider duty, an ethical duty, when the state is not an institution of ethics, but an institution of right. But be that as it may, duty or not, even if we don't say the state should make pragmatic use of punishments, at least it can make pragmatic use of punishments. At least it has that right. But the important point to Kant is that this always remains a side purpose. The actual purpose of the punishment is not a pragmatic one, but is simply punishment for punishment's sake because it is deserved. If you made only the pragmatic reasons the purpose of punishment, or if you made it the main purpose, then the logical conclusion would be that there should be the most cruel, the most brutal, the most draconian punishments imaginable, right? I mean, why, if you say the main purpose of punishment is preventing further crimes, why just execute the murderer? Even if publicly. Why not slowly and very cruelly torture him to death? So as to discourage people even more from murder. And why just execute the murderer? Why not have draconian punishments for everything? I mean, even if someone jaywalks, why not punish that by being tortured to death? I mean, we will torture to death like 2 or 3 jaywalkers, and after that, no one will dare ever jaywalk again, right? So, from a pragmatic point of view, that would be the most reasonable. So this is precisely the reason why Kant also says punishments cannot simply be pragmatic, because, of course, he's against that. For several reasons. He is saying that, first off, now the punishment would be arbitrary again, right? If we don't do to the criminal what he has done to others, but rather if we do much more to him, then this is arbitrary. Like, should we punish him 10 degrees harder or 100 degrees harder than what he has done? There's no reason for the one or for the other. And second, of course, this to Kant would be against human dignity, right? Here you can go to my lecture on human dignity on the topic, where I said that to Kant, a human being must always treat it as a purpose in itself, not just as a means to some other end. We can also use someone as a means to some other end. We do that all the time. We even have to. But we mustn't only do that. I gave examples in that lecture. Like, for example, if you pay someone, some construction worker, to build a house for you, or if you have sex with your wife, then sure, the construction worker is a means to you getting a house. And your wife is a means to you getting sexual satisfaction. But at the same time, they are not only means, not only objects to you. You also have reverence for their humanity. You also revere their dignity, which is also why you don't violate their freedom. Now, if on the other hand you enslave someone and force him to build a house for you, if you rape someone, then you reduce them to merely an object who isn't free, and that is immoral. And so likewise, that's why Kant would say, if we are already punishing someone, we might also use him as a means to discourage others, sure. But if we were to just punish him in order to prevent further punishments and to discourage others, then we would reduce him to only a means, and that would be an attack on his humanity, and that cannot be. On top of that, Kant would say that even for pragmatic reasons, there's no good reason to do that, which is quite right and quite insightful, right? Because people tend to always scream for harsher punishments, like especially when it's something that they condemn very much, like if someone rapes children, then they will scream, oh, we need the death penalty, he deserves death. But this does not come from a point of rationality. This is just an expression of their rage and more often than not of their helplessness in the face of such a terrible deed. It's not that it really helps the victims in any manner. I mean, it has been proven time and again that harsher punishments don't simply lead to less crimes. And that is something Kant was already aware of. He says at some point that in the places where thieves, when they get caught, get executed right on the spot, you have the most stealing going on. So clearly this doesn't work. So yeah, Kant is saying we might also on the side have pragmatic purposes in punishing. As I said, he's even saying there's a wider duty to use the punishment for that. But he's saying the actual point of the punishment should always be simply to punish because this criminal deserves a punishment, because that is just. There is even an infamous passage where Kant says, even if a civil society were to be dissolved by the consent of all its members, for example, if a people inhabiting an island decided to separate and disperse throughout the world, the last murderer remaining in the prison would first have to be executed, so that each has done to him what his deeds deserve, and blood guilt does not cling to the people for not having insisted upon this punishment, for otherwise the people can be regarded as collaborators in this public violation of justice. However, in sharp contrast with this, Kant also says if at some point there are too many criminals, too many murderers, so that for pragmatic reasons you cannot put them all to death without destroying the state, then you might also use some other punishment, namely then you can also deport them and force them to labor, which is, for example, what England did for a while, right? Deporting criminals to Australia. And once again, this is completely inconsistent. I mean, what happened to the blood guilt of the people? What happened to Kant's principle that fiat justitia et pereat mundus? Let there be justice even if the world, that is, even if this particular state should perish over it. What happened to having to punish for punishment's sake because it is just and not out of some sort of pragmatic considerations? Once again, this inconsistency is so obvious that unless we turn to Kant's old age at that point, I don't know how to excuse it. But that is what is to say about his theory of punishment as such. Now on to criticizing it. As you can imagine, nowadays it gets criticized a lot, but often in a very superficial manner. Often the criticism boils down to, well, the current prejudice is that something like the death penalty is wrong, so Kant must be wrong. And I'm sorry, but that's completely unphilosophical. I mean, maybe the current prejudice is wrong. Maybe Kant is right that there should be a death penalty. When criticizing a philosopher, you have to seriously consider what he is saying. You have to consider the possibility of him being right. Indeed, going back to Kant's skeptical method, which I already discussed in its own lecture, Kant would say you should even try to not strawman, but to steelman a position. You should try to come up with your own arguments to help your opponent's position, to make it as strong as possible, and then see if it holds up. And the issue is, of course, that nowadays many people are against the death penalty, which I consider to be a correct position. I'm also against the death penalty, but not for the correct reasons, not out of correct philosophical principles, but rather out of some sentiment, some feeling. It doesn't feel right to kill someone, and that is not what the moral or the legal judgment should be based on. Indeed, that's exactly what Kant criticizes. He discusses Beccaria, a well-known Italian legal scholar, legal theorist of his own day, who already was against the death penalty. This was something that was already being discussed, and he accuses Beccaria of not being philosophical, but rather just basing his opinion of what Kant would call sympathetic sentimentality and pretentious humaneness. And this is not what we should do. I'm thinking back, when I studied, I actually had one class that was on punishments, on the criminal right. We were reading different texts, not just Kant, also others like Hegel, like Foucault. And most in that seminar, most that were sitting there with me wanted to become teachers for ethics. Ethics is its own subject here. And yeah, they were these nice, friendly, sentimental, humane people, but not very philosophically inclined, just sitting there because they had to become ethic teachers, and not even willing to entertain a thought that disagreed so strongly with their sentiments. So yes, they outright rejected Kant, but I couldn't help but feel that there were similarities to just a few years prior, when I myself had been sitting in an ethics class in high school, and some of my classmates, I mean, I had a lot of conservative Mohammedan classmates, when we were discussing something like homosexuality, were very passionately, very violently against that. And I think that these future ethics teachers, in their attitude, in their posture, had a lot in common with some of their future students. Now, they and the students both might not see that, because sure, they have two very different opinions, right? Homosexuality is wrong, or the death penalty is wrong. And sure, one of those opinions might be more humane than the other. But that doesn't matter so much to the philosopher, because the philosopher does not look at the surface, at the empirical. What opinion does someone have? The philosopher looks at the posture someone has. The philosopher asks, what principle does someone come from? And here the point is that both of them just have the opinion that they were raised on, just have the opinion that represents the consensus of their respective milieu. And both of them absolutely refuse and are incapable of ever questioning their opinion, their prejudice, and ever entertaining another one. And this is not how you should deal with a philosopher. You must be able, and this is not me saying that as the first person to ever say that, you can go back to Aristotle. You must be able to sort of step out of your own opinion and take up another opinion that is not yours. Think it through as if it was your opinion. Think based on this opinion's principles. Entertain it. Only that way can you see if it might be right or wrong. And here I will also point back to Kant's critical method, which I also discussed in a lecture on that topic. Kant's critical method demands that we don't just refute an opinion, we don't just show through arguments that it is wrong, because Kant would say, even if it is wrong, if someone holds that opinion, then apparently it seems right to that person, right? I mean, even the most obviously wrong opinions, even the most ridiculous opinions, even opinions that completely go against common sense or against science, like even conspiracy theories. Sure, someone can deny that the earth is a globe, or someone can deny that there's a climate crisis, or someone can deny that there's an ongoing genocide in Gaza. Sure. And in that case, he's denying something on which there's scientific consensus or scholarly consensus. In that case, he's denying something which everyone can clearly observe with his own eyes if he just chooses to look. Sure. But even such a person would not hold that opinion if it didn't seem right. So there must be something in that opinion, no matter how wrong, how ridiculous, how vile it is, that seems to be right. And so Kant says, or rather the critical method demands, that we ask, what is the principle out of which someone arrives at his opinion, and out of which this opinion must indeed seem to be true to him. And only if we can answer that, do we have the right to actually dismiss that opinion. It's not enough to disprove the opinion as such, because our arguments that seemingly disprove it might seem true to us, but we have to admit that to the other person, his arguments that seem to prove his opinion to him also seem true to him. So who's to say that he is under an illusion and not we? We can only say that once we manage to not just refute his opinion, but also explain the illusion that nevertheless it holds over him. So that is what we must do also when dealing with Kant's opinions on punishments. My first, more minor point of criticism does not concern Kant's principle as such, but rather that even if we did accept that principle, I think Kant misapplies it. Because again, Kant says the punishment should not be arbitrary. The criminal should get, both in quantity and quality, what he did to someone else. If we go with that principle, okay, the murderer being executed seems to make some sense. But why would you castrate the rapist? Sure, castrating rapists, I mean, it's not like only Kant suggests that. there were times and places when that was actually done, and even nowadays you have some people that want that. So it seems to fit somehow. It feels right in a way to some people. But in philosophy, we cannot base our judgment on, well, it feels right. So what is the principle? What is the logic here? The rapist has taken someone's sexual autonomy in one instance. But if we castrate him, we take his sexual autonomy not just in one instance, but we take it forever. So that would be way overblown. Even if you say that in quality it is the same, because in both cases you are violating someone's sexual autonomy, both when you rape and when you castrate someone, it's certainly not the same in quantity. Because the one act is a one-time thing, but as bad as it may be, it does not prevent the victim from ever having sex again, while the other act does. So I don't see how that fits. From Kant's principle vasa, it would follow that the proper punishment for the rapist would be to get raped, which Kant, however, is against. I will get to that in a moment. Now, as for the thief, here this might sound the most weird, the most far-fetched. Kant saying the thief should be enslaved, should be forced into labor. Like, how is that doing unto the thief what he has done unto others? Well, Kant's point is that the thief has not respected others' property. The thief has, so to say, said that property is abolished. For me, there is no property. What belongs to someone else also belongs to me. I can take it. So therefore, we must take him up on that maxim, and we must abolish his property, Kant says. He can no longer have property. He loses everything he owns. Now here you could ask if that, even if it is doing to him what he did to somebody else in quality, if it is really the same in quantity. I mean, the thief might have stolen 100 euros or 1,000 euros or 1,000,000 euros. There's a difference, right? And the question is, should he lose all his property for stealing 100 euros? But Kant would probably answer that we mustn't go by something empirical, like how much somebody stole, but rather we must consider his maxim, the principle according to which he acted. And the principle was that no property of others matters to me. No property is sacred. I can take whatever I want, and therefore he must have no property. Okay, let's say we accept that. But why forced labor? Well, to Kant, this is not the actual punishment. The actual punishment is the thief losing all property, and the forced labor is just sort of a necessary consequence of that. Because Kant said, well, without property, the thief would die, he would probably starve, but the death penalty for the thief would be too much. Kant wants to restrict the death penalty to actual murder. Maybe also high treason, somebody, so to say, murdering the state as such, but that's it. So the thief should not die for his crime. And therefore, Kant says, he henceforth, since he has no property anymore, must be forced to work in order to be fed. But I don't see that. I mean, we could say, okay, we are taking all of his property, but otherwise he remains free, so it could now be his choice to either work or maybe to beg and hope that he can live off someone's charity, or maybe to leave the country and try to live in another state where he maybe once again can attain property. That should be up to his choice. So I would say that Kant doesn't correctly apply his own principles here. But that aside, let's say he did apply them correctly. I would still criticize him in that case. So another point is that Kant emphasizes that punishments should not violate humanity as such, should not violate human dignity. Again, you can go back to my lecture on human dignity. That is the central core of Kant's moral philosophy. We have to have reverence for human dignity as such. It's the whole reason there's not just duties towards others, but also towards ourselves. Also, our own dignity matters. And so Kant says in the punishment, human dignity must not be harmed. And that goes both ways. So, on the one hand, Kant would say the dignity of the criminal must not be harmed. Because no matter what terrible crime he might have committed, no matter how vile he might be as this particular individual that he still is a human being. He still has humanity. And even if we don't revere him, we must still revere his humanity. And that's the reason why Kant is, for example, against torture. That's the reason why Kant, while he is for executing murderers, says the execution should be done in a dignified manner that does not do dishonor to the murderer's humanity. So many manners of execution that existed in the past and also in Kant's days, he rejects. He says someone should not be quartered or burned or whatever, tortured to death. That is against human dignity. Kant also rejects doing experiments on murderers. Like that was something that some people proposed in his day, saying, okay, they are sentenced to death anyways, so why not do medical experiments? They might die in the process, but at least they have done some service to humanity. At least they were useful. And Kant is not rejecting this on pragmatic grounds. Like, he's not saying that such experiments could not be useful for advancing medicine. Surely they could be. But he's saying this would be immoral. We would be reducing this human being to a simple means to an end, the end of attaining more medical knowledge. And this mustn't be. This experimenting on a human being, even a convicted murderer, would be against human dignity. And also that is the reason, as I just mentioned, why Kant is saying we cannot rape the rapist. He's saying castrating the rapist, that does not harm human dignity, but subjecting him to himself being raped, no matter how much he might deserve it from some perspective, would simply dishonor humanity as such. But also, Kant says it's not just about the humanity and the dignity of the criminal getting punished, but we must also consider the humanity and the dignity of the punisher. If someone were to torture another human being, no matter how evil that human being might be, no matter how deserving of torture he might be, still the torturer would do something that is simply beneath his humanity, right? I mean, doesn't matter that the tortured is a criminal, even if it was an animal. And I will, at a later point, I will give a lecture on what Kant has to say about animals, but he would say that animals have no rights as such. And he would certainly say that it is okay to kill an animal in a humane way in order to eat it. Kant was not a vegetarian. But he would say that if you torture an animal to death, there's something wrong with your humanity. And that is not dignified. That is not what a rational being should do. Not for the animal's sake, but for your own sake. You are violating the duties towards yourself if you let yourself be such a being who does such things. And that would also go for torturing the criminal. Which is also yet another reason why Kant wouldn't want the rapist to be raped, because who is to do that? Who would do the deed? Kant would say this cannot be a job that exists in a society. Your job cannot be that you are a state-employed rapist who rapes people because they are convicted rapists. No matter whether they deserve it, you would still be a vile person for having that as your job. You would still be throwing away your own humanity if you made your own body into an instrument to commit such an act. And I fully agree with Kant on that. And I think it is an important point that is considered way too rarely. You have a lot of people who want harsh punishments or who justify things that are already happening in the world, things like torture, who say, oh, it's okay to torture terrorists or whatever. I mean, just look at Israel, right? Where someone who, it is proven that he raped a prisoner, there's video footage of that, can go on national TV and actually justify himself. And in the parliament, his actions also get justified. The whole country is disgustingly vile. That is a society that has thrown its own humanity away. And that is true even if you were to believe that all Palestinians are terrorists. That doesn't change the fact that you mustn't stoop to their level, if that was indeed their level. Of course it's not, but if it was, still, you must not therefore go on the same level. And again, you have these people who want such things, who justify such things. I had that in my school day, right? Again, back in ethics class, we were discussing such things, and there was someone, for example, who was like, oh, a murderer, a rapist, there should be the death penalty, but he should not just have its head cut off or be hanged or whatever. That's too easy. That's a too painless way to go. We should torture these people to death. And these people really let his imagination run wild. He was like, we should one by one cut off their fingers, and then we should put salt into the bloody wounds to make it hurt more. And it will probably come as no surprise that this boy, good Catholic boy, by the way, of Polish origin, devout Catholic, who would pray, who would think that non-Catholics go to hell, but who apparently had never heard that being a Christ is about loving your neighbor, or that whoever is without sin may throw the first rock. It will probably come as no surprise that he was also amongst the bullies in class. So the point is, no matter how evil the murderer or the rapist might be, if you support such things done to them, if this is your imagination, you for certain are an evil person. And for certain, you have no relevance for humanity, and not just in criminals, but for certain also not in the humanity of others who are not criminal, like the classmates you're bullying. And again, just think of the Israelis with all their war crimes. with the glee they commit these war crimes with. They revel in humiliating and harming and torturing, and never mind what they are doing to the Palestinians, which of course is terrible, but also look what they are doing to themselves, the damage, so to say, they are doing to their own souls. I mean, that alone, the way they act, proves that they are in the wrong. Even if the Palestinians were all evil anti-Semites who celebrated the 7th of October, even if Hamas were all terrorists who hide behind human shields, then, okay, maybe you would fight as a soldier, maybe you would do what has to be done, but you would do it in a solemn mood. And you would do it with sadness at what has to be done. You would not be happy about killing someone, even if he might deserve it. And if you revel in that, in attacking human dignity as such, humiliating, hurting, then you yourself have no human dignity. So yes, a very, very important point of Kant, that we cannot give out punishments that harm the dignity of the criminal. Such punishments would necessarily also harm the dignity of the punisher. But I would ask Kant, don't those things that you propose, don't they also harm human dignity? I mean, I agree with you that the rapist getting raped would be unbecoming, not just for him, but also for the one doing it. But I don't think that him getting castrated is particularly dignified either. And likewise, when it comes to the death penalty, okay, torturing someone to death surely is not dignified. But still, if you hang someone or if you put someone on the guillotine or whatever, that is still not dignified. Like, I agree with Kant that rape cannot be a punishment, even if just for the reason that no one in their right mind can hold that as a job, can be a state-employed rapist. But I would also say no one in their right mind, no one who is a good person, can be an executioner, can be employed by the state in order to kill people, no matter whether they are criminals or not. I mean, that must do something for you. Imagine that is your job. Imagine for years, for decades, maybe like for 40 years or whatever, maybe not every day, because maybe there's not that many criminals, but still, what you do as a job is killing people. You cannot just do that and then lead a normal life. This will destroy your soul. No normal person will want to do such a job. Even if you believe that these people deserved it, you yourself would still not want to be the one doing it. If you want to actually do this job, there's something fundamentally wrong with you. And this is actually something we can also observe, right? People who do such things, they do take psychological damage. They suffer from it. And it's not a new phenomenon. People have this belief that, okay, in our day, we've become soft, we now value human life, but in the past that was not the case. Like in the Middle Ages, they loved executing people, it was a public spectacle. It's not quite so simple. Like, there's an example here in Germany in the late Middle Ages. I know of one executioner who worked for a city who didn't want to be an executioner. The city gave him the job. They basically knocked at his door and said, "So you are our new executioner. If you don't do it, then you get punished." So it's not like he chose that profession. And then basically for the rest of his life, he tried to at least kill people in a humane way. And he tried to change the punishments to less cruel to more humane punishments. He, for the rest of the life, tried to get rid of the job, tried to pass it on, and also tried, since he had to do the job, to at least have to do as little as possible. So this is normal. Wanting to do the job is not. And Kant himself does seem to have been aware of that on some level, because there's points where he discusses the judicial system in England, and he says, okay, over there they have a jury, and he mentioned that apparently certain professions did not get to sit in the jury, which included executioners, along with butchers and surgeons. And Kant mentions that at some points. He mentions that the reasoning that the English give for that is that these three professions, since they deal with blood and with death on a daily basis, it's too normalized for them, right? So they should not be the ones deciding on whether someone should be executed or not, because they might treat it too lightly, because it's not a big deal anymore to them. So, and Kant mentions that at some points in an approving manner. So he seems to think it's right that butchers and surgeons and executioners don't belong into a jury that decides on whether someone should be executed. So he does seem to be aware that this is not a job that a human being should do. So I would say, based on that alone, even if we did say the murderer deserves death, we would also have to say, but no one deserves having to be the one who puts him to death. But let's even say that Kant applied his own principle of retaliation correctly. And let's say that there was no issue of the human dignity of either the punished or the punisher. Still, why retaliation at all? I mean, it should be obvious that this cannot be the job of the state. Why should there be punishments for punishment's sake? Why does Kant say it is just that to the criminal happens what he did to others, and therefore it must be done even if the society was to dissolve itself? Why? It seems to me that Kant here has forgotten his own principle of right. So I point you back to my lecture on what is right and what is its difference from ethics. It is ethics that is concerned with whether someone is good or evil, that is concerned with someone's inner will. The right doesn't care about that. The right cares about actions, no matter what reason they might be done for, right? So the state's laws forbid murder. You're only a good person if you don't murder because you have reverence for your fellow human beings' humanity. If you would like to murder, very much so, if you would be totally capable of that, and the only reason you don't do it is because the state threatens you with punishment and you don't want to go to jail or be executed or whatever, then ethically speaking, you are still a murderer at heart. Even if you don't actually do the deed, even if your evil will does not realize itself, the will is there, and only that is which matters. And if God, who can read your heart, were to judge you, he would still throw you into hell, even if you have never done a bad action, because you have had the evil will that would have done bad actions if given the choice. But to the right, that doesn't matter. You have not murdered, you have not committed the act, so you will not be punished. You are a free person. And the right only has one job: to make sure that several beings that all have free choice can live alongside each other without violating each other's freedom of choice. So therefore, the right must restrict people's freedom to a degree, but only as far, Kant says, as is necessary in order to retain and protect their freedom. So that's why murder or rape or stealing should be forbidden, because by committing these acts, I would violate another person's freedom. If you get murdered, you are less free afterwards. So my freedom to murder therefore should be restricted, just like others' freedom to murder me should be restricted, so that we can all stay free. But that is the state's whole job, and nothing else. Well, if you go with that, then the conclusion should be, if you ask me, that the punishment should only go as far, should only restrict the criminal's freedom as much as is necessary in order to protect people's freedom. That is, in order to prevent such crimes. But anyone would have to agree that in order for people to be safe from, let's say, a murderer or a rapist, you don't have to execute or castrate him. You can also lock him away. People will be equally safe from him. So, as long as the state's job is defined as making sure the free choice of several free beings can exist alongside each other, there's no reason why the state would have to go further than, for example, lock people up. So again, it seems to me that Kant here has forgotten his own principle of right. The right, after all, is only concerned with actions that can rightfully be enforced. Again, I said that in the lecture on right and ethics. There are some duties, like the duty not to murder others or not to steal from others, that come with a right of force for these other people, Kant says. So someone has the right to force me to not murder him or to not steal from him. That is, if I attack, he has the right to defend himself. But Kant himself says that this right only goes so far as is necessary. So in the state of nature, I have no right to punish someone who attacks me. I have the right to fight him off, to drive him away maybe if he won't let go. But once I beat him and he's lying there defenseless, I have no right to punish him, because that is not necessary for me keeping my own right, for me staying alive. Well, then the same, I would say, would be true within the state. We have no right to enforce goodness. I already said that, right? I already said the beggar has no right to force the person passing by to give him money. All we have is the right to force others not to violate our rights. But if someone is locked away, he cannot violate my rights anymore. He doesn't need to be executed for that. And this leads me to my main criticism, or to me, according to Kant's critical method, explaining where Kant's main error lies. It is that he, to some degree, still confused right and ethics. Because in some way, Kant is indeed consistent, and you can hardly deny that. Yes, the murderer in some way would deserve to die. I mean, that's what he did to somebody else. Now, the other stuff, as I said, we could discuss. Does the rapist deserve to be castrated? Does the thief deserve to be enslaved? But surely we could agree that they would deserve to be raped or to be stolen from, respectively. This is something I already mentioned in my lecture on the categorical imperative. The whole point of morality for Kant is that my maxim, that is my principle according to which I act, should be such that I could want for it to be universalized. So I could want for everyone to act according to this maxim. And I can never complain, me as an individual, if someone treats me according to my own maxim. That is, if someone treats me the same way I have treated others. I mean, it would be ridiculous for the liar to complain, you lied to me. Or for the murderer to complain, oh, you are about to murder me, that is not okay, you mustn't murder. Because there you could always reply, if you really believe that murdering is not okay, why did you do it? By doing it, you basically confirmed that in your opinion it is okay. So that is the reason why in morality, Kant says that if we do to an evil person what he has done, like if we lie to the liar or if we murder the murderer, we would not treat him unjustly. We would commit an injustice. So Kant is saying this is still morally forbidden. We still should not do it, but not for his own sake. He, as an individual, could not rationally complain about it. So in that sense, punishing someone by doing to him what he has done to others, from a moral perspective, would seem somewhat consistent. That is also why I think a lot of criticism of Kant's theory of criminal right and of Kant's support for the death penalty, a lot of criticism is so bad and superficial. It completely misses the point. It refuses to think in Kant's own principles, and it is just, as is Beccaria's rejection of the death penalty, it is, as Kant says, just based on sympathetic sentimentality and pretentious humaneness. My criticism is different. As I say, my criticism is that Kant did not properly separate the area of ethics and the area of right. And I already mentioned that in the lecture about that topic. I said there that to Kant, the sort of umbrella is moral philosophy. And both ethics and right, to him, are part of moral philosophy. And I already said in that lecture that the main errors of his philosophy of right basically come from this mix-up, come from him not fully separating right and ethics. Sure, they are two different areas to him, but within the same whole. And that's the error. Fichte would go on to completely separate them, to say the right is not dealing with ethical, with moral questions at all. And it is this mix that I think leads Kant to his wrong theory of criminal right. Because again, from the perspective of morality, yes, if you killed someone and now you get killed, you kind of got what you deserved. So in that sense, from an ethical point, this would be the fitting punishment. But the state is not there to enforce ethics or to give people what they deserve in an ethical sense. And it could not even do that. Because again, ethics is about our will. But no one, except God, no one can know our will. Yes, it might be somewhat deserved to be treated according to one's own maxim, but you never know what someone's maxim was. You only know his outer action in which the maxim manifested itself, but different maxims could manifest in the same action, so you never know for sure what his maxim was. That's why, and I talked about this already in my lecture on the categorical imperative, why Kant says that morally we can urteilen on a person's actions, but we cannot richten a person. Only God can richten. I said there that this is kind of not translatable because both urteilen and richten would be translated as judging. But urteilen is more of a neutral word, just judging what is or isn't the case, like judging on what is true. Like, for example, judging by the clouds, it's going to rain soon. Here we would use the word urteilen in German, while richten is judging more in the legal sense, right? Der Richter is the judge. Gericht is the court. So what Kant is saying is that we can judge someone's actions. We can say what you did there, for example, killing someone, is something you should not have done. You violated the moral law by doing it. But we cannot judge him as a person because we don't know why he did it. We don't know how good or how evil his will was. That only God can do. So we can never say, you deserve to go to hell. We can say what you did was wrong, you should not have done it, but we cannot say, oh, it was unforgivable, you deserve hell. Just like we cannot say to anyone, oh, you deserve heaven. We can say, you did many things that were right. You always did what you should have done, but did you do it for the right reasons? Do you deserve heaven because of that? We cannot judge that. So this is very important. In ethics, when someone does evil, from an ethical point of view, even if he would deserve punishment, we cannot punish him. We have to leave that to God. All we can do, again, from an ethical point of view, all we can do is tell him that what he did was wrong and that he should not have done it and that he should not do it again. So we can try to aufklären him and to turn him into a better person. But we can never judge how good or how bad a person he is. We can only judge whether his actions are right or wrong. That's from the perspective of morality. From the perspective of right, of course, we can say not just your action was wrong, you should not have done that, but also since you did a wrong action, you must now be punished. We must now prevent this action happening again. So, again, someone who is a murderer, from a moral point of view, might deserve death. Someone who is a rapist might deserve being raped. Someone who is a thief might deserve being stolen from. However, this is only true insofar as that person is a murderer or a rapist or a thief. If he ever were to regret and repent and to change himself, I mean truly change, a revolution of character, as Kant would say, if he ever were to turn into a morally good person, then he would no longer deserve this, because he would no longer be that murderer or that rapist or that thief. He would have stopped being that person, and now punishing him would be like punishing any other random person that has not committed that crime, right? That's exactly why in religion you have God's forgiveness, like in Christendom, right? If someone now submits to Christ, symbolized by the baptism, past sins are forgiven, because the idea, at least, is that he died in the flesh as the person used to be and was reborn in the spirit as a new person that is free of sin. And Kant, in some lecture on anthropology, says as much. He says that if you truly changed, a punishment of revenge, of retribution, would no longer make sense or even be possible. All that would make sense now was an exemplary punishment that is once again pragmatic punishment. Using you as an example for others, punishing you so that others will not do that deed. And indeed, that is fully correct, I would say. So I would say, if someone, let's say, commits murder and then truly, truly regrets it, truly becomes a better person, then there would be no grounds anymore to hate him or to hold his past against him, and we would have to truly say, okay, it's fine. You are a different person now. You don't deserve punishment, and God would not send such a person to hell. However, in the legal realm, he would still have to go to prison, because we would still have to say, you might be a different person now, but who you are on the inside does not matter to the right. Only your outer actions are. And the fact of the matter is that with your actions, you have broken the law. You have violated someone's rights, and you must be punished for that. The law must be enforced. Otherwise, if you get away with it, others might end up thinking they will get away with it too. So it's fully correct what Kant says here, but it once again contradicts what he says in other places, right? So let me put it straight. If someone was a murderer and now suddenly he got hit by a lightning and died, then we could maybe say, oh, maybe that's not a coincidence. Maybe that was divine punishment. We would not have to be sad about him dying. We could say, okay, this guy got what he deserved. After all, he was a murderer. And we could treat this like, indeed, it was divine punishment. But the point is, we ourselves mustn't try to be that lightning. This is not our job. We are not God. We cannot look into people's hearts. So again, I think the crucial mistake of Kant is that he mixed right and ethics. And now we got the principle that made seem what actually is wrong right to Kant. Because once you do think that right is part of the wider philosophy of morality, then sure, you will come to the conclusion that punishments should be what a person morally deserves. But no, what a person morally deserves, he must get from God, not from his fellow human beings. His fellow human beings must just tell him, you did wrong, you should change. And in the area of right, it's not about what someone deserves. It is simply about, once again, making sure the freedom of everyone is protected. So stepping in when the rights of people are violated. So in conclusion, I would say Kant's theory of criminal right is an unaufklärdness of him. Because, and I will get to that when I eventually talk about his concept of aufklärung, of enlightenment as it is usually translated. he says the process of Aufklärung is the process of getting rid of your delusions. And delusion, in turn, he defines as confusing a means to reach a purpose with an end, with a purpose in itself, and treating it as such. So the regular example would be the miserly, the stingy person, right? If you collect money, the money is a means to some other purpose. The money is a means to buy something with it. But the guy who doesn't want to spend his money, who will live like a poor person, only eat water and bread, only wear old clothes, just so he doesn't lose any money, will be rich, but not truly, because he lives as if he wasn't rich, as if he was poor. To him, the having money is not for spending it for something else, but rather having money is a purpose in itself, and that's a delusion. That's wrong. Well, if that is the definition of Aufklärung, then I would say Kant too is unaufklärt here, because Kant was under a delusion. Punishments, at least the punishment in the state, I'm not talking about the divine punishment, about heaven and hell, but punishment in the state should be a means for some purpose. The purpose of the state always being the protection of people's rights and thereby of their freedom, and thereby ensuring that there's peace between people. And Kant treats punishments as if they were a purpose in themselves, as if they should happen for their own sake, but nothing outside of morality should happen for its own sake. So only if you confuse the right with morality can you come to this wrong opinion. But that's Kant's theory of right, and I hope that at least showed how we should deal with something like that. We mustn't just outright reject it because it goes against current sentiments and prejudices, saying, oh, but death penalty is wrong. That would be superficial and unphilosophical. We must at least entertain this thought. We must accept that maybe we are wrong and Kant is right. And we must ask, how does he come to his conclusions? What is his principle? And then we can ask, A, did he conclude correctly from the principle? And B, even if he did, is the principle as such correct? Which in this case, I think it isn't. In this case, two principles got mixed up. But only then, only if we can say that, can we properly criticize and reject this position. But with that, I hope to next get back to something more important, or something where Kant's work is more important, where Kant has more to teach us. I want to next discuss the question, well, who and should run the state and how should it be run? How do we make sure that the state is a proper republic, which is what Kant wanted, and not a despotic state? And what even is the difference between the two? My deep thanks be to my supporters: Leo Allmann, Cenkubilay Altu, Thomas Doringer, Gernot Klaufen, Benjamin Lehning, Ökobong, Alexander Reuter, Lisa Rinner, Spendierhosenträger, Ron Suhl, as well as to all others who support me and my aufkläring cause.